Wow.
Yes, awesome. We finally
Hooray.
got you in. All
Oh,
right, so we're all excited and waiting for you already. So let me do the little bit of an introduction.
thank you so
So
much.
good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, wherever you are. Thank you for joining UOW Malaysia KDU's Insights from Australia, the UOW Guest Lecture Series today. Our topic for this session is Form and Inspiration, a workshop on writing short fiction. I'm Michelle, the moderator for this session, and I'm glad to welcome all of you. Now, before we begin, I'd like to introduce to you Associate Professor Shady Cosgrove. She's a novelist and an academic with research interests in prose fiction and narratology. Her novel, What the Ground Can't Hold, explores themes of hope, survival, and forgiveness within the context of Argentina's dirty war. The novel is a gripping exploration of the ways the past closes in on the present and destroys the foundations upon which we build our lives. Interesting, right? Her memoir, She Played Elvis, was shortlisted for the Australian Vogel Literary Prize. The work chronicles her pilgrimage across America to Graceland to honor the 25th anniversary of Elvis Presley's death and explores the themes of family, loss, and belonging. Her short fiction has appeared in various publications such as Southerly, Overland, Best Australian Short Stories, as well as Spineless Wonders publications like Flashing the Square, Small Wonder, and Out of Place. She regularly presents at the Australasian Association of Writing Programs annual conference and the International Conference of the Short Story in English, and has received the Varuna Eleanor Duck Fellowship Duck Flagship Fellowship. She is also a member of Academic Honor Society Phi Beta Kappa. Today, she will talk about something that all of us have been encouraged to do, writing, but a slightly less academic kind, fiction. And it's short fiction. So, how short is short? We shall find out from her. Before I hand over the session to Associate Prof. Cosgrove, I'd like to remind everyone here with us today that you can ask questions or send your comments in via the chat box or the Q&A. So let's get ready to be inspired by Associate Prof. Cosgrove's creative ideas. Over to you, Prof. Everyone,
Oh,
enjoy the presentation.
oh, thank you so much, Michelle. It's such an honor to be here. I apologize. I'm often working in Zoom, and I know Zoom very, very well, and I don't know WebEx as well. So I definitely had moments when I was like, "Oh no, why am I not? Why why isn't this technology working for me?" So lovely. It's lovely to see you guys. Lovely to be here. I'd like to thank Michelle. Thank you for your warm introduction. Chi Wen Lao and Lu Chung Hang, and the lovely folks who have been in conversation with me over these past few months. It is an honor to be here. I would like to acknowledge and pay respects to the traditional owners, elders past, present, and emerging of the land where I'm connecting with you all from here in Australia, and the Wadi Wadi people of the Darawal Nation. So I'm writing from traditional Aboriginal land, or speaking with you all from traditional Aboriginal lands, and would like to pay my respects. So this workshop, we're going to be focusing on writing short fiction. So that's short stories. And we'll be talking about what is a short story? How short is a short story? How long does a short story need to be? What's the difference between a short story and, say, a poem, right? So we're going to be looking today at short story examples. We're going to be paying attention to the conventions of form. What are the kinds of things that establish and create a story? And we're also going to think about creative process. How is it that we write? How are we inspired? What are strategies for invoking inspiration? And how do we find confidence, right? How do we find confidence, and how do we write when writing inspiration doesn't come to us. Okay. So I admit this is a little funny for me. I'm used to seeing everybody who I'm Zooming with. So I'm wondering, Michelle, do you have a sense of how many participants we have that have logged in?
There are about 40.
Oh my goodness. Oh, I wish I could see your faces, you guys. Maybe next time we'll work on something like that. What you're going to have to do, and I'm so sorry to do this to you, but I have I have kind of a very specific teaching pedagogy, and that is that I like to be in conversation with students. And so I'm going to ask people to write into the chat, right? So I can't see you right now, but I feel that we can communicate through the chat. And I guess I'm just wondering, first of all, I'm interested to know who are you? So if you wouldn't mind letting me know your name in the chat, and if you could just tell me why you're interested in writing stories. Why are you here today? Is it because you love to read? Is it because you are, that you are interested in imagination? Are you here because your teachers have forced you to be here? I'm just joking. So if you don't mind, if there's anyone who's watching this, if you wouldn't mind just putting in the chat, okay, so Adam's here because now, and I'm not seeing how am I let me open up the chat for you. Bear with me. Oh, I want to see, they're popping up and then disappearing. Okay. So Adam is here because I love writing, right? Michael is here for filmmaking. Okay. Both of those are great things. Filmmaking and prose fiction are really an interesting combination because if you're writing script, you're very interested in what happens, right? And we're going to be talking a bit about that today. So I hope this is useful for you. Oh, a comics writer. Lovely. And you teach narrative studies. Thank you. You enjoy writing fiction. Evelyn, I teach English at Penang University, Penang campus, and I also teach writing to students. So any tips about writing that's helpful for students. Deanna is from the UG campus here because I've always had an interest in writing. See, I love this idea that writing is something that many of us are compelled to do. Oh, Chen, we all want to improve ourselves. It's a process that we're always involved in. I love that. Thank you. Using stories in teaching would enhance learning for students. That's great. Lee likes writing fictional stories. Haha, fair enough, Lee, fair enough. Karina has an interest in writing since I was young. Script writing, okay, lovely, lovely. Reading novels and trying writing. Oh, you guys, thank you so much for letting me know. It's nice for me to have a sense of who it is that I'm talking to. Creative writing certainly is an important element of advertising. Mendy is here for filmmaking as well. So we have a fair few folks that are interested in script. I teach script writing as well. So that's something that I do have a bit of background in, though I'm not a script writer as per a number of my colleagues who are quite established in that field. So today we're going to start with form, and I'm just checking here. Is it possible for me to share my screen? Allow WebEx to share my content. Bear with me. Privacy. Why isn't it letting me share my screen? Aha. Okay, there we go. Oh my gosh. Oh, this is horrible, Michelle. It's telling me if I want to share my information here, I have to quit and reopen. So you're just going to have to give me a very quick moment. I will be right back. It's important. I've done a series of PowerPoint slides, so I do need to do that. So just one moment.
Okay, we'll wait for you.
I'm so sorry.
Sorry for the interruption. Just bear with us for a few minutes. Prof. Cosgrove will be back soon.
Michelle, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Perfect. Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. We'll continue on. So I'm going to start. Oh, lovely. And now everyone's coming in. Perfect. Okay, perfect. I'm going to start with sharing a screen. Great. Can you see that? Is my screen being shared? It should say form and inspiration.
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. And you can hear me?
Right? We can hear you loud and clear.
Ah, perfect. And then let me just get the chat up. So I've got the chat. Okay, we're all here. Perfect. Okay, let's get going. I apologize for these technical difficulties. Okay. So I'm going to start off with a quote from Colin McCann, who is the author of Let the Great World Spin. And this is a long quote, so we're going to unpack it a little bit and we'll go slowly through it. He starts with, this is author of Let the Great World Spin, and he wrote a collection of essays, kind of talking about the writing process and instructing young writers. So he says, be earnest, be devoted, be subversive of ease, read aloud, risk yourself. And what I take that to mean is that you should write about things that you care about, right? And you should be committed to getting the things that you care about onto the page. And sometimes it's uncomfortable writing about things that we care about. And sometimes we write about things that we care about and we write about them poorly, right? That's just one of the things. And it can be confronting when you're trying to write about something that you care about so much. And yet to have it, the first draft, the second draft, the third draft, not necessarily ring true with the idea of what you're trying to get across. Be ready to get ripped to pieces. It happens. Fail. Take pause. Accept the rejections. Be vivified by collapse and practice resuscitation. So the thing that I find with writing is I don't actually think of myself as a writer. I think of myself as a rewriter. So I'm often writing and rewriting and rewriting again because what I think is on the page, what's in my head, my goal when I write is to get it onto the page, but it often is not on the page. And so I workshop. And so one of the things that I find really useful is to give my work, give my stories, my critical work as well to colleagues, to writing workshop participants, to former students, all like there's a lot of different ways of getting feedback, but I find feedback is really important because oftentimes you can't see what you can't see on the page, right? So I have the vision. If I describe a scene walking down the street, I have the image in my head of that scene, but I can't know if you're seeing that scene from the words that I've put down on the page. So I think this kind of idea of rewriting is really, really important to writing. Find a reader you trust. They must trust you back. Enjoy different. Michelle, is there maybe a way of deleting? Thank you. Put your faith in language. Character will follow and plot too will eventually emerge. Push yourself further. Do not tread water. It is possible to survive that way, but impossible to write. We get our voice from the voices of others. Read promiscuously. Write beyond despair. The considered grief is so much better than the unconsidered. Hope and belief and faith will fail you often, but so what? Share your rage, resist, denounce, have stamina, have courage, have perseverance. The quiet lines matter as much as the noisy ones. Allow your fear, give yourself permission. You have something to write about. Just because it's narrow doesn't mean it's not universal. Don't be didactic. Nothing kills life quite so much as explanation. Believe in detail, unique your language. A story begins long before its first word. It ends long after its last. Make the ordinary sublime. Don't panic. Reveal a truth that isn't there yet. At the same time, entertain. So there's a number of things in this quote that jump out at me. I mean, we could spend our entire time just picking apart each section here that we find. But the idea, first of all, that jumps out at me is that it's important to read, right? So if you're reading a lot, that's going to help inform your writing. We get our voices from the voices of others, right? We understand how to put words together by reading passages where words are put together beautifully, right? And there's a lot of stuff happening here in this passage that about kind of inspiring us to take ourselves seriously, that you have to commit to writing, you have to commit to rewriting, but it's also, it's also okay to take yourself seriously in that endeavor. Okay. And I can't, I suppose I can't underline enough that one of the important things is getting feedback. So finding out and asking people who are reading your work questions about it. So I'm just wondering, for anyone who's there who has access to the chat, what is it that jumps out at you from this? We have so many different things that are in this particular quote. What is it that you read that connects with you? Share your rage and allow your fear. Yeah, I love that too. I love that too. And I think that it's an important space because writing is it's a vulnerable thing. You're putting yourself out there. The idea that you have something to say is almost a scary thing, right? Deciding that you have something to say and it's worth somebody's time to read your work can be intimidating. Have perseverance and allow your fear. Yes. Oh, and reveal a truth that isn't there yet. Absolutely. Right? All of these things make the ordinary sublime. Yes. Yes. Oh, you guys, oh, this is so lovely. You're with me. Oh, absolutely, about the quiet lines mattering as much as the noisy ones. It's interesting. Delia Falconer, who's an Australian writer, talks about you don't want too many noisy lines on the one page, right? Because we get overwhelmed and it's hard to follow what's happening. Unique your language. Yes, I love that. And I love that using an adjective as a verb in that particular example, so that he's actually uniquing language as he tells us to unique language. Yes, thank you. Oh, wonderful. Okay, we'll carry on. So, what is story? What is a story? So Joshua Lobb, who's one of my colleagues here at the University of Wollongong here in Wollongong, Joshua Lobb, one of my colleagues, he's a narratologist. And in an introduction to first-year undergraduates here at the University of Wollongong last year, he said, story is the currency of meaning. That is, we use stories to understand the world around us and to figure ourselves out. We take an experience, we bite-size it into a story, and we mull it over that way, right? It's not an accident that we tell stories of the dead at funerals and wakes. It's a way to remember the dead, to understand what they mean and what they have meant to us. I frequently find that if I go through an experience, I have to think very consciously about how I talk about it, because the stories I tell about the event will become the way that I remember it. So stories are powerful, not just the ones that we write down, but the ones that we tell and how they shape our lives. I'm thinking here too about when I travel. Did I have a fun time? I often don't have a fun time when I travel because I'm used to routine, and traveling breaks routine, right? But that's what I love about traveling, right? So even though I'm often uncomfortable, I love that discomfort around traveling, right? I find that discomfort invigorating and exciting. I love meeting new people. But then it's an interesting thing. How do you tell somebody when somebody says, "How was your recent trip?" Do you talk about the discomfort, or do you talk about the enthusiasm and the connection and the excitement, right? All of those things are there, but you can shape a story in dramatically different ways, right? And so that's one of the things that I think is very interesting about storytelling and story as the currency of meaning. And I think that's why it's not an accident that many of us have been compelled to write since we're very young, right? I mean, a number of people even earlier who did we have? It's not letting me go back. I'm just looking up here. It's not letting me go into the chat from original, but I remember there were a few people who were like, I love writing. I've loved writing since I was young. But what is the story in this context, right? What is the literary short story that we're talking about? Now, historically, in a Western context, we could go back to the 19th century when short stories were very popular. And I'm thinking here of authors such as Washington Irving, Edgar Allan Poe, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Kate Chopin, Honoré de Balzac, Flaubert, and Chekhov, right? And Edgar Allan Poe actually defines the short story as something that can be read in one sitting, right? That was in the philosophy of composition. So generally, a short story can go up to 10,000 or 15,000 words. Often they're confined to one setting, but I can think obviously of exceptions off the top of my head that belie that. It's usually one series of events, one point of view. But today we're talking about stories that are much shorter than that, okay? So today we're talking about short stories. Charles Baxter argues that in short fiction, chances are the story has to do with a sudden crisis where a character reacts, right? There is a choice or an illusion of choice. And furthermore, the situation was there before the character was. So the thing that I want us to be thinking about today in terms of microfictions and short stories is something has to happen, okay? You can have a short work like a poem that's more meandering or that's more pondering or, you know, capturing a moment. Things don't necessarily need to happen. But oftentimes in the short fiction that I teach, we have something happening, right? There's a shift, okay? The context has changed through the course of the story, okay? So notice though that if we go back, that Charles Baxter uses the words chances are, okay? Chances are the story has to do with a sudden crisis. What this means is that it's a convention. And it's a convention in short fiction that we have a sudden crisis where a character reacts, which is different from acting, right? So a reaction is something happens and you react to it. And the situation is already there. I'm thinking here of a very short example where often attributed to Ernest Hemingway, which is six words: for sale, baby shoes never worn. Now, what's the story here? What's happened in this story? We have six words, but something's happened. What's happened, do you think? You can pop that in the chat. Yeah, thank you. The baby's passed away. So where do we get that? For sale, baby shoes never worn. We get it not actually, yeah, in the never worn. Perfect. Right? So there's this interesting thing where even if we don't get a full description of the baby, we don't get a description of the parents, we don't understand exactly what's happened, but we understand by implication, right? So the implication that the baby shoes haven't been worn gives us the story. And that in combination with the fact that they're for sale, right? You could have baby shoes that were never worn, you know, maybe they were outgrown, you don't know, but there's something about the for sale that contextualizes that for us and kind of gives us the larger arc of what's happened here. Okay. Do we see this story as it's taking place? Or is it being told after the fact? And maybe the parents don't like the shoes. Absolutely. After the fact. Okay. How do we know that it's being told after the fact? Yeah. Never worn. Okay. So we know that. And it's an implied meaning coming from that. Absolutely. The fact they weren't worn. Okay. So one of the things that I love to think about with fiction is how can I use implication, right, to set up and explain things? How can I use that so that I don't say, I mean, because this story could have been much longer. It could have given us a big description of the baby. It could have told us, we could have had scenes in the hospital. But it's also interesting to think about how few words can you use that leaves space for the reader's imagination as they're thinking through the events that are being described. Okay. Another way to look at the short story is that it's a moment. It's the crux, the climax. It's the changing point of a larger story. But all of the setup and all of the aftermath is stripped away. The short story is kind of the moment of confrontation. It's the heaviness of realization. It's the point, right? The point of the story is the microfiction, okay? We get the point in Ernest Hemingway's story without any buildup. We get character by implication, okay? Also, we have short stories you can think of, say, fables or anecdotes, where you have less description. So what you have there has to be concise and it has to be operating on many levels, okay? So with shorter fiction, I see the microfiction as anything up to 500 words, okay? Whereas Jerome Stern argues it's shorter, that it's 250 to 300 words, okay? Either case, it's not taking up very much space. So if you're sitting there and you're thinking, how can you write a story in 250 words? That's crazy, right? What I would say, though, is think that there have been thousands, if not millions, of stories written in less than 250 words. If you think a joke is a story, there's something that happens, there's a reaction, there's the punchline that kind of gives us the sense of what's going on. Anecdotes, parables, okay? So those are microfictions. Flash fiction, that's generally a story of no more than 750 words, right? Roughly 3 pages. Then we have sudden and it's interesting. So again, there's conjecture on this. I'd say no more than 750 words, roughly 3 pages, but Shepard and Thomas say that give it a bit more leeway, up to 2,000, okay? Up to 15,000 words, that's the short story, okay? So what's interesting is sudden. So sudden fiction. Sudden comes from the Latin subire, meaning to steal upon, unforeseen, swift. And I think that applies to the short story. It doesn't have the luxury of setting up. We are immediately in the story. The story is stolen upon us, okay? So where do we find stories? Okay. One thing is you can use personal experience, okay? But you have to be very careful with personal experience. And I'm writing an essay about this right now. Why do you have to be careful using personal experience when you write stories? What are some reasons? What are some things you might want to be thinking about? You can pop these in the chat. Sensitive information about yourself? Absolutely. How much do you want people to know? Yep. Trauma dumping. Okay. Details that you want to share or not? Absolutely. What about if you're writing about friends or family? Because we don't operate alone. We operate in societies and contexts. What might you have to be careful if you're writing about the autobiographical? You might need their permission, right? Absolutely. You may decide you want to write regardless. You might change details so that people aren't recognizable, but it's something to be thinking about. I wrote a memoir, and it was very important for me that I kind of double check things with friends and family who are represented in the text, right? What might be some issues in terms of writing well or not well? Like, do you think it's easier to write something if you've experienced it, or is it harder? Is it easier to write a story if you've experienced it, or does that make it harder? There's no right or wrong answers. You can't be right or you can't be wrong. You can be right, but you can't be wrong. I mean, it's different for everyone. But for you, if you were going to write a story right now and it was something you'd experienced, okay, so easier if you've experienced it. Harder because we might need to change sensitive details. easier to write it, but harder to articulate if it's very personal. 50-50 from Mendy. I think it's a tricky one. I think it depends on what the story is. Oh, excuse me. If you're too close to the material, right? Like if you're writing something that you feel very, very strongly about, it can become difficult to have distance on the subject material, right? It can become self-indulgent, right? It can become too introspective, too navel-gazing, right? And that kind of shifts back to the comment about trauma dumping. Absolutely. Okay. But one of the things that you can get from personal experience is you have access to the details that are going to make the story feel rich and important, right? So we have a couple, like, so you have to kind of balance it out a bit. And if you're using personal experience, it also helps because you know what you're writing about, okay? And writing itself is a personal experience. The very nature of putting words together on the page is an individual experience, right? So there's a number of things that kind of operate to make that a good idea. And yet you do have to be careful about how much of your lived experience do you want out in the world? How much do you want your reader to know about you? They might not know that it's autobiographical, but I still, like, there'll be some details that get in and I'm like, oh, do they know? Do they know? Okay. But I also have developed strategies, right? So that I can write about things without letting it become self-indulgent. So do you understand what I mean by being self-indulgent? I mean that I'm more writing for myself and thinking about myself and the story I want to tell instead of how it comes across for the reader. But there's things you can do to make a story that you're writing with your own experience less self-indulgent. For instance, you can take only part of the story, right? If you've had an argument with a friend and you want to write a story about that experience, you can take one aspect, maybe what the argument was about, but use a new setting, right? Set it in a different place. You could use a different narrating voice, right? Someone who's not you, perhaps. It could actually be from the point of view of the person you were having the argument with. You could use it, you could make the argument about something different, right? Or you could add layers of subtext so that you think the argument is about this, but really it's about this, right? And you can actually take the outline of the situation and you can shift it in ways so that it becomes a different story, so that you kind of can use both. You can make something personal, but you can also make it separated from you and a bit more impersonal at the same time. Okay. Maybe you could make the narrator a different gender. Maybe you could make the narrator a different class. All of these things will impact on the story to keep it outside of being you and being recognizable as you, but they can also help you draw on the information that you know at the same time, right? You can also turn it into metaphor, right? So I had a story that came to me. I had a friend and he brings his family, he brings his children, and he meets with his parents, right? And he does a big Zoom conversation with his sister who lives on the other side of the world. And he feels like his parents don't understand him, and he feels like his sister doesn't understand him. And so he was telling me about this experience of having to sit through these dinners that he's just like, they don't understand me. They don't know who I am. And so, and I love this idea that we grow up with families and yet sometimes they have no idea who we are. And yet they do know us. Like they know us quite practically. Like we've been together for decades of, and yet there's still these moments when you're like, my family doesn't know me. So I wrote this story about him. And in the story, he turns into a bird, right? So he turns into a bird and he just starts swooping back and forth over the table while the parents are talking about things that he just doesn't care about. And so you can turn things, you can metaphorize them. That's what I call it, where you take something, you take this feeling of not belonging, right? Like he's a different creature at the dining table. And then he turns into a falcon and then he's kind of swooping and he's like trapped inside and there's not enough room and the ceilings aren't very high. And, You know, it's kind of swooping over his father's bald head. That's another way of doing it. But it was still quite obviously taken from the story that he had told me. And so I did, you know, bring it to him. I said, you know, I did say, I've written this story based on that conversation we had, you know, are you okay with it? And he said, yes, it's fine. And yet another example that I'm thinking of here, and that I actually have copied for you all here, is a story about an experience I had with a friend when I was traveling. And I'll read it to you. Dim sum, the meals. Sometimes I guzzle tea to keep from gagging, and then I'm surprised by raw dough with sesame seed paste inside. Beautiful. The green bean ice water dessert is bizarrely gritty, unpleasant. Chicken claws outstretched on a plate. Wow. And then fried dough that's like eating fairy ribbons. But I'm stumped at the 1,000-year-old egg. It's been marinated in dirt. The yolk is black. The egg white is amber. I only know it's an egg because my new friend is telling me so. You must try it, she says. I'm not an adventurous eater. I've surprised myself so far, but this is too much. I know me. The egg won't make it from fork to mouth. I used to eat it as a child every 2 weeks. She is leaning close, her hair pinned back in elaborate twists. I understand what she's saying. Food is culture. Culture is people. The person in front of me is her. I push the fork into my mouth, the marinated egg that is both egg and not egg at the same time. It's salty with traces of tea and yolk, not unpleasant. She watches as I swallow. My fork reaches down again. I have no idea who I am. So with this story, I wanted to write about that sense when we travel, that we do things that we think we might not do. And that kind of food is this avenue for understanding other cultures. And in this moment, I was pushed beyond what I felt comfortable with, but in a way that opened up this brand new world that was exciting and beautiful and tasty for me, right? And so you have this moment where you kind of set it up and something happens. What is it that happens? The narrator tries the egg, right? And I took this absolutely, this was an autobiographical experience, traveling with the colleague I mentioned before, Joshua Lobb, the narratologist. We were traveling with a group of students. So that's an actual experience that I had with a new friend, and the story kind of emerged out of that, okay? I think, I did show it to my friend. My friend was fine with it. I think because the person who's being laughed at in the story is me, right? Like it's my discomfort and how I had to kind of get over myself to experience this beautiful food, right? And it might have been different had somebody else been the person that was kind of needing to grapple with something. But I think one of the reasons why that story was, you know, nobody had any issue with it is because the person who I'm critiquing really in that story is myself. Okay, let's keep going. So that's one strategy. So one strategy for writing stories is pay attention to what's happening in your life, because interesting things happen to you, and write about them. Okay. Another strategy, is imagining things, right? Just imagine it, use impersonal experience. What is a potential problem with imagining something that you don't have any experience with and writing a story about it? What's a potential issue? Ask you to write that in the chat. So if you have to write a story, if you write a story, too much of imagination, wrong facts. Absolutely. It might not ring true. Okay. Why you need the creativity? Yep. Why might it matter if you get the facts wrong? Yep. Time, inspiration. Those are great, you guys. It might be harder to come up with something just randomly. Yep. What's a problem if you get the wrong facts? If you write a story and you get the facts wrong, why might that matter? It can be insulting and misleading. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's no longer convincing. Oh, Fiona, that's beautiful. I love that idea that the story needs to be convincing. That's beautiful. And there are different audiences that you have to bear in mind. Some people will know and some people won't. If you make mistakes, the trouble is, absolutely, if the audience has the same experience, they'll figure it out. And if they don't have the same experience, you could propagate things that aren't true, right? Like, I know that fiction isn't real, like the story isn't not something that has happened, but people still believe that you've done your research and that you've gotten the details accurately. So if you put a story, or if you write a story and people don't, and you put inaccuracies in there, people will assume you've done your work, and you actually end up at risk of propagating inaccuracies. Okay. And you don't want to do that. I mean, that you start getting into unethical terrain there, right? And also, I mean, I think though that point that if your audience figures it out, they're not going to trust you as the storyteller. And you have to be careful, because you don't want to lose your authority as the storyteller. Once you've lost your authority as the storyteller, your reader won't keep reading. If they don't believe that you put the work into the story and that you understand the things you're writing about, they're not going to keep reading. Okay. And what you want is you want your reader to be with you, riveted throughout the entire story. Okay. So I don't know. So does that mean that we shouldn't write from personal experience? Right? Is that what I'm saying? No, absolutely not. Okay. I'm not saying that at all, because sometimes stories just kind of fall into our laps, right? I'm going to give you guys a story here that I imagined. Okay. Absolutely, Chen. I love that idea that the writer and the reader need to be connected. I love that. That's beautiful. So I've had success writing about personal experiences, but I've also had success writing about things that were not connected with me at all. Okay. And I'm going to just give you guys an example here. This is a story called Drop. And I've written this story. It's about a 9-year-old boy who drops rocks onto an overpass where cars are driving. And I was inspired by a story in the newspaper. And I read the story in the newspaper about this thing that happened, and I tried to imagine how it might have happened. Now, I've never been a 9-year-old boy, and I didn't live in Australia when I was 9, right? So I don't know what that's like. But the story works. And in part, I think it works because I based it on an exact place where the story had taken place. So right near the University of Wollongong, where I work, there's an overpass. And I imagined it as that overpass. And I think that sometimes you can take a situation that you imagine, but you put something specific that you know very well into the story, and that helps ground it. I need to have an angle. I need to have setting or character or something that grounds the story, so that I can kind of hang everything else off of the story. So here we go. Drop. Sun-washed sky faded, almost white in the glare. Stubborn cars chase each other along the concrete corridor below. The overpass meek in comparison. Beside me, Carl is a kid with a round head and mean pockets. His fingers are stubby, his nails dirty, but he's got strength in them. Come on, he says. It takes 2 of us to lift the granite. It's jagged with rock sparkles that catch the light. It balances gently on the railing. Carl starts counting backwards, waiting for a red one. They score highest. I wait. When he reaches 1, we let the rock go and start running. My sweaty hands over my mouth catch what breath I have left as we dart off the bridge. A horn blares from below, and then braking, swerving, but no crash. Carl's legs are pumping madly in front of me, and he's laughing. I'm laughing too, but shrill. My voice echoes back from the asphalt valley beneath us. I push him along when he wants to stop and look out over the road. Okay? So, just to be clear, I have never done that. That's something I have never done. And yet I tried to imagine who are the people. Yeah, thank you, Renise. Who's this is something that has happened. It was in the newspaper. Who would that person be? Right. And I think there's this element of curiosity to writing. Like, who is it that would do that? That kind of propelled me into the story. Okay. Um, so other sources. So you could, I think the newspaper is a wonderful idea for coming up with story ideas, because newspaper articles are about things that have happened. So this idea that I talked about at the beginning of today, that, you know, a story needs to be something that happens. There needs to be a situation where there's a reaction. Yes, absolutely, Adam. Absolutely. Right? This idea of a response is really important, because and newspapers are, they do that. Newspapers give us, and the newspapers give us crazy things that people do, right? So immediately you have a sense of urgency and story and context and setting that you can start playing with, so that you don't have to face the blank page all by yourself. What are other possibilities? Image, right? You can use a photograph. You can use a painting, a poster, okay? What might be some good things about using an image to inspire a story? Why might that work for you? An image. Why might one start writing with an image? Speaks 1,000 words. So we can get a lot of information, can't we? Straight away. Yep. Yep. We can get a lot of information. What else can we get from an image? Get a lot of information. Perspective, absolutely. So we get the sense of a gaze that's looking at what's taking place in front of us. Yep, you can, there's a situation in the image that you can use to inspire you. There's also often place, right? So you can use the perspective of the image. You can use the place that's being shown in the image. You can use what's happening, absolutely, the color palette, the composition. What's one potential problem with using an image? It's a potential problem. It can be confusing. Copyrights, right? You maybe you could write about it though in a way that nobody would know. Like, you could write about an image and no one would know exactly that's what you're seeing. What you see is not what you think it is, absolutely. And sometimes the way you see things might be different to the way other people see things. Ah, excuse me. I love the ideas that you're offering up in the chat. It's you're inspiring me. Thank you. Another source for stories is thievery. Now, this is kind of a joke. Like, obviously, you don't want to plagiarize things, right? We have a lot of lessons, you know, at the university about being very careful to properly reference things, right? But I just mean kind of stealing things from life. So I don't know if anybody's read Harry Potter, but J.K. Rowling said that she saw Harry Potter on the train, right? And that she just started writing a story about him. Okay. In What the Ground Can't Hold, I saw this family. They become the Myers family in the book. I saw them in a cabin up in Argentina, and I didn't talk to them, but we all stayed in the same cabin for a number of days. And I watched them and I took details about them, and then I wrote them into the novel, right? And I just purely imagined I had these very specific people that I could kind of use as signposts to keep me on track. But then I imagined, you know, what they were saying. Their conversations were in German. I didn't speak German, right? I could use body language, and I used that as an inspiration where I just thieved strangers, right? And my novel in no way was about them. I just used who my brain thought they might be to keep the novel going. And in fact, almost every character in that novel was kind of stolen from life. The character of Carmen was based on a tango dancer that I met in a taxi for a very brief time. Rosie was a musician from the Goulburn Blues Festival where I saw her perform and I thought, oh, that's the kind of presence that I imagine this character has. Pedro is based on the actual cabin owner, the person running the cabin. And yeah, so like I think that's another thing where if you're riding a train or you're riding a bus and you see someone who's interesting, you can imagine them into stories. And that's a safe way, I think, because they'll never know, right? And you're not actually writing them, you're writing your vision of them, you're writing your idea of them. What are other things that we can use? Place. So some places are just begging for stories to be written about them. Has anyone here ever been someplace and you just think, I need to write a story about this place? That was one of the things that happened for me with that cabin up in Argentina. Oh, lovely, lovely, beautiful. So I see I'm not alone there. Thank you. Yeah, it's fascinating, the idea that some places really stir us and make us want to write stories. And one of the things that's tricky for me though is then you have to, how do you get characters and plot, right? So do you let the space indicate that, or do you kind of impose characters and things happening from somewhere else? Another way of finding stories, compassion and empathy. So that's imagining a situation, but that you've maybe witnessed somebody else going through, and then using kind of the point of view there. There are potential pitfalls with that, though, in that sometimes if you're writing something about somebody going through a hard situation and you get the details wrong, it can actually be hurtful for them, right? So that's something else to be thinking about. Another place to find stories is something that your brain keeps tripping on. I have a difficult time sleeping sometimes. Does anybody have situations where you think of something you said during the day and at night you just can't go to sleep because everything just keeps going through your mind? Does anybody have that experience? Oh my God, Michael, hooray. Yeah. Where, and you're just like, why can't I forget? Okay, I said something silly, like, why do I care? Why do I care? And yet I can't let go of the silly things that I've said, right? Or, you know, I promise I won't let the technological failures, I won't let that keep me up tonight. But that's the kind of thing where I mean, where you're just like, oh no. Yeah, exactly like an earworm where you forget the title of the song. Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, I love that comparison. Um, so sometimes I write things, about things, like things that, like ideas or things that keep me up, or things where I kind of stew on them. And here's another story. This is a story about that I wrote when my son was in primary school. Awards. My son received an award today, and it felt like I was receiving an award for raising a child who receives awards. Leaving the school grounds, parents stopped us on the footpath, holding my arm, leaning close. But if I could choose an award, any award, it would be from my son's father, and it would say award for not yelling. And he would present it to me 3, 4, 5 times a day. Our domestic life would become an ongoing series of ceremonies with the home appliances, toaster, vacuum cleaner, iron, and kettle lined up, applauding. And that was what, I wrote that because I was, I'd had a hard day and I was frustrated and I wasn't happy with how I handled the situation. And so then that kind of became a way of writing about things, right? And to also be thinking about the idea of, how crazy it was that how crazy it was that my son received an award and yet I kept getting congratulated when I had nothing to do with, with the award. So I'm wondering, what else do people use for inspiration? Can everybody just write, how have stories come to you? And it's okay if it's one of the examples I've already given to you, or if it's a different example entirely. Oh, dreams. That's wonderful. Dreams are a wonderful place. Personal experience. Yep. So kind of a reckoning with we have the unconscious there, but also quite the conscious of the personal experience. Lovely. Where else have you guys gotten your story ideas from? Imagination? Image? Nice. The weird dream? Perfect. Dreams journal? Oh, I love that. Music? Oh, Chen, that's a great one. I love writing about stories related to music. We're going to have some music later today. Movement? Oh, observations? Side tangents? Beautiful people's behavior? Oh, Shalini, absolutely. People are crazy. Oh, Jason, yes, morning coffee deserves many good stories. Imagination and movies, people speaking. Oh, these are great ideas, you all. These are great. I love this. Oh, Mendy, people watching. Absolutely. That's kind of the thieving from life. I love it. Beautiful. Okay, so I have a story for you all by a former student that we're going to look at, but we need a little background. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'm going to share actually something else. So bear with me. I'm just going to play you a little bit of a song, if that's okay, because the song sets up the story. Okay, so let me just find to get it up. Okay, I've got it up. Okay, so I should be sharing. So that should be Gillian Welch's Wrecking Ball. And I'm going to press play. Let me get the chat happening. Oh, sorry, apologies. Chat. Can everybody see? Can you somebody write in the chat, can you see, am I sharing the screen that says Wrecking Ball with artist Gillian Welch? Perfect, thank you. I'm a rolling stone. That's what I was when I first left home. Took every secret that and headed for home. At the wrecking ball. Studied that sin. Okay, so I'm going to keep that playing while I just days right deal, but my mind goes through that. Okay, so that gives you a sense of the song, okay? Because that song is referenced. And now I'm going to share again. Bear with me. We're going back to the PowerPoint slide. Okay, so we've got the PowerPoint there. And is the PowerPoint showing up now? Can you just let me know in the chat? Ah, perfect. Okay. We're going to get there with this technology, you all. Thank you. Okay, so we have Gillian Welch's Wrecking Ball. So you kind of get a sense of that song, right? Like it's kind of a meandering and sad song, right? And then this is a story, and this was a story that was actually posted as a Facebook post. And so you kind of have it there, but I'm going to read it to you because it's a bit small. And so this is a former student who's now a writer and professional editor, wrote this a few years ago. And it goes like this. And just to give you a heads up, he was working at the time as an editor for romance novels. And it was not quite, what he, like, that was not where he wanted to go, but it led him to a series of jobs where he's now, working for a much bigger publishing house. It is, that's true. Romance is where the money is. Okay, so that just gives you a bit of a background on Patrick. So this morning I was standing at the station listening to Wrecking Ball by Gillian Welch. So that you guys get a sense of that song because we've just heard it. And I was thinking about a romance book I just read, which said something about passion being important in life. And I was trying to think what passion feels like, but I just kept thinking about the flu. Okay, that cracks me up because we have kind of passion and flu being set up against each other. When the train pulled up, I looked at my reflection in the train doors because I accidentally shaved my whole sideburn off the other day, and I can't stop looking at it, and saw a wasp fly directly into my neck. I was already stepping into the carriage by this point, and I really wasn't worried because in my heart, I was a sad Southern woman, right? Because of this song. I kind of loosely clutched the wasp in my hand and tossed it away languidly, like I was tossing freshly cut grass on the ranch, like I might dismiss a persistent suitor. Then I went down the stairs and sat. In reality, what I'd actually done was grab a wasp and throw it directly at a bald guy in the standing section. And for the rest of my trip, I just kept hitting repeat on Wrecking Ball and watching everyone freak out and run around as this wasp kept landing on people. And at every station, more people would get on. Tired-eyed commuters in suits with running shoes who didn't expect to be in any danger. And there was always this moment where they would look at everyone else ducking and screaming, and they'd just stand still, listening to music or playing on their phone, and suddenly they'd be like, holy, there's a wasp on me. It was pretty great. I felt powerful. I wanted to poke the lady next to me and be like, I did that. I threw that wasp. I think that passion is nice, maybe, which is probably the point of all these romance books I've been reading. But I think life is about throwing wasps at things and seeing if they stick. You're either a wasp thrower or someone surprised by a wasp, or maybe you are a wasp. I don't know. What's a hornet? Okay. So the point here is that you can find stories anywhere. You can find stories on trains, and microfictions are the kinds of stories that fit into a Facebook post, okay? But microfictions are much, much more than Facebook posts. They are constructed. Something needs to happen, something that the reader is not expecting, right? If you start telling me a story about someone on a train, I don't think, oh, this is going to be a story about wasp throwing, right? Right? And so you have this kind of bizarre thing happening. We get a sense of the character of the narrator, right? We get that through the, he's haphazard, he's shaved off one of his sideburns, he's working in romance novels, right? We get a sense of character, we get who it's happening to. But the trouble is oftentimes if we write like a Facebook post, we assume our friends know us, right? The reason why I think Patrick's story works so well is we get a sense of who he is, even if you don't know him. And the way to do that is to use detail, right? Detail is the thing that gives us character. So what I want people to think about is how do you make something happen, right? And who is that happening to? And can you use detail to be giving us both the thing that's happening and the people that it's happening to? Okay. So on another note, we're moving on, making time to write. So one of the things that I was thinking about in terms of how do we find the confidence for writing and how do we kind of work through writer's block, okay? The first thing that I would say in terms of working through writer's block is making sure that you have time to write, okay? Ian McEwan puts it eloquently. It's about not doing things, not emailing, not picking up the phone, not checking the internet. All you have to do is create a bit of silence around you. Okay, so the first thing I would say is how many people have been working on an assignment and you don't get very far in the assignment because you keep checking your emails? I do this. Does anybody else do that? Yeah. Or social media, checking social media. Yeah. Yeah. Or responding to text messages. Yeah. So I think the key with writer's block is oftentimes it's that we're not forcing ourselves to sit alone with the story that we're working on or the assignment that we're working on. Okay. So one of the things that I started doing, and I did this recently, and I did it for a month, where I committed 10 to 15 minutes a day minimum writing. And frequently I would write much more than that. But I started a companionship with a friend, one of my colleagues, Christine Howe, who also writes at the University of Wollongong. And we committed to sending each other a microfiction every day. Now, sometimes I would wait through my day and I would look for things to write, and I'd sit down and a story would just pop out super quickly and I'd send that to her. Sometimes it would take much longer, right? But by having somebody that I was in conversation with, somebody who was expecting a microfiction every day, so we did it for 30 days. By the end of it, I had 30 new stories, right? Some of them were much better than others, I'm going to be honest. There were some stories where I was like, I'm only sending this because it's very late and I need to send something because I have to go to sleep, right? But one of the things that came out of it was that I got much better at writing stories, and I got much better at sitting there and waiting for the idea to come. And sometimes ideas come from desperation, right? Has anybody ever had the experience where you're waiting for a deadline, and the closer the deadline get, like you get something out and you turn it in, but really it's only because you had a deadline? Does anybody have that experience where you write for the deadline? I do this. Yeah. Oh, Renice, we're together. We're together. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So one of the ways that you can kind of set up to avoid writer's block is to give yourself deadlines. And so that's what Chrissy and I were doing for each other. We were giving each other deadlines so that, I would write for her, she would write for me. Okay. So does anybody here write already? Like, do you write stories regularly when they come to you? Do I have anyone here that's already kind of got an active writing practice? You guys are shy. You're like, no, we don't. That's okay. That's okay. At times, spotty at best. That's okay. That's okay. Spotty's fine. Oh, I love music lyrics, Chen. I love that. Do you make how do you make time? I guess the thing that I want to kind of get at is that if you want to be writing more, you need to make time for writing more, right? Um, And some people have routines for writing. I find my best writing happens straight away in the morning, right? I do my best writing kind of between after breakfast until 11 a.m. And after that, I'm not so good at writing, right? Because it kind of uses up. Like, I actually find I can't write every now and then. Oh, Michael, you're the opposite. How so? You write all the time. You're always writing. Midnight is, oh, I see. Midnight's the best. Okay. Not the morning. Got it. Got it. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I used to be that way, and then I got old, Michael. I used to write best at midnight, and then I have too many things I have to get up early for. Oh my gosh. That's when you start to get emotional. I love that. Well, I think that emotional, like, kind of, I think there is something about our inhibitions when we're tired. The inhibitions drop, and we are able to get more onto the page. So, okay, so we have some people who write at midnight. I want you guys right now to think about when you do your best writing, right? For me, it's early in the morning. For Renice, it's a bit later, right? For Michael, it's later. After midnight. Okay, okay, lovely. Mahathir. At night. Oh, you guys are all night owls. Oh, I'm envious. We have at night. So no, come on, is there anyone who writes in the morning, or am I completely alone? I might be completely alone here. At night. Oh no, Jen at night. Everyone's at night. Okay. Um, so I guess too, right? So the thing to be thinking about is with the creative process, we'll come back to that in a moment. creative process. It's about also confidence comes into it, right? And I love, there's a quote. Oh, gosh, I'm forgetting who it was from, who said, write a story every day. You can't write 365 bad stories in a row, right? Write a story every day for a month, or a year. You can't write that many bad stories in a row. But in terms of finding confidence, I think the important thing to do is to remember that you are not your draft. Okay. Your draft is not your story, and you can redraft. It's okay to write bad stories. All of my stories start off as bad stories, right? They do. But I rewrite them. I come back to them. I share them with people and I get feedback. And through that feedback is how I make them better stories. And then once I get to them to a certain stage, that's when I start sending them out into the world for publication. I get feedback from editors, and then that works to help me rewrite stuff and polish it so that it's out in the world and even stronger. Okay. My stories get redrafted sometimes 5 or 6 times, sometimes 20 times, sometimes 50 times, right? I published a short story last year. It was only like 3 paragraphs long. I had been working on it for 10 years, right? That's ridiculous. And yet it wasn't doing what I wanted it to be doing. And I actually needed that kind of perspective to bring it together. Okay. So you go into the process, you go into the writing process, knowing that you work as hard as you can, you get the story as good as you can get it, and it will still be bad. It will probably be horrible. One day you might look back on that version and be mortified, but that's fine, right? The important thing is actually that you just keep writing and you keep revising and you keep making your stories better, because it's through that polishing that stories end up out in the world. The trouble is we read all the stories that are out in the world and we think, oh my God, that's an amazing story. How could I ever, write something that amazing? Well, that story's been redrafted and redrafted. It's had editors looking at it, right? It's not just written alone by the author. And so the important thing to know with writing is you just have to keep doing it. That's the key, right? You can't let the process paralyze you. Okay. So I had a few ideas that I kind of wanted folks to think about. And what I'm going to do is, we're not going to have time to do them today, right now, because we had some technical difficulties, for which I apologize profusely. But I would want you to just think about an event. Okay. So think about an event that can be real or unreal, just something that shifts the status quo. So can I get everybody to just write any kind of event into the chat? It could be, Patrick got on a train and he threw a wasp. It could be, I saw an old friend at the store. They had dementia and didn't recognize me. Okay. Yeah, like an inciting incident. It absolutely can be an inciting incident. Just anything that happens. Right? Like there's a car crash. There's I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. There's a car crash. There's track work and a train is delayed. Or there's a shadow that disappeared in an instant in the lift. Yeah, abs that's great. Like what is that shadow? That's great. Oh, love seems to be near. As soon as I touch it, it disappears. Oh, Chen, that's beautiful. Oh, I love that. Almost love as a shadow. Oh, you guys. What are some other things? Unintentionally skipped a step on the stairs. Yep, absolutely. Do we have any other ideas of things that happen? Things that could happen? Things that could be stories? There's floods and somebody's house gets flooded, right? That's something that happens. What else? Just any ideas? So what I would suggest doing and thinking about is coming up with ideas of just things happening, just things that happened in your day, things that you witnessed happening, things that you read about in a newspaper, right? You know, a friend eats dinner with his family and he feels his family doesn't understand him. Oh, two babies getting swapped at the hospital. Oh, that's a brilliant idea, right? Um, you know, or a kid dropping a rock on an overpass, or, you know, a mother being kind of grumpy at home and being upset with herself for being grumpy at home. It doesn't have to be real, right? It doesn't have to be something you've experienced, just something that happens that shifts the status quo, that makes the world of the story different. Driving down the street. Oh, that would have been nice. Darn, we don't want to wake up. We want to stay driving down those streets. That sounds amazing. Then what I do, so I come up for when I'm writing short stories, I come up with something that happens, and then I think of a couple of things that lead up to that event. And then I put those together and I make that a short story. So that's one That's one way of coming up with story ideas. Oh, I love that idea that life is going to be beautiful when my father drove me across the paddy field. Make lemon pound cake. Oh, you could absolutely. I'm just looking, two babies get swapped. If you don't heal what hurts you, you'll bleed on people who didn't cut. Oh, you guys are kind of profound. A new pair of legs. Absolutely. These are all wonderful things. I mean, and Michael, you could even write about it could be about the making of the lemon pound cake. Like you could actually make it quite literal in a way that offsets the metaphor there. That's really interesting. Oh, Jason, birds born in a cage that think flying is an illness. Oh, I love that. Do you need to have themes or thematic statements? You need to have something that the story is about, but it's very brief. And I think that you need to let the story, the action and the characters carry the theme, if that makes sense. So you don't need to say thematically, this is what I'm looking at and exploring, but you can actually show the reader instead of telling them through the characters and through the action that takes place. You need something to happen, Evelyn. Whether or not that's a plot, I mean, plot in narratology is a causal sequence of events. So I suppose, yes, you do. You do need a plot. You need something to happen for it to be a story instead of a poem, say. Yeah. Wonderful. I'm aware that we're coming up on time, and I'm not sure how strict you all are in terms of needing to go right at 4:30 my time, but it's not 4:30 your time. But I'm certainly happy to stay and take any questions if anyone has questions, or I'll let Michelle take over if there's anything that you want to address, Michelle, or if there's any questions that you have that you'd like me to expand upon.
Right, thank you very much, Prof. That was marvelous. You have certainly inspired us to be more creative in our writing. But I do look forward to trying out some of the ideas myself, and maybe also with my students. So actually we have run out of time already. It's already 2:30 over here in Malaysia, and some of you did manage to ask some questions. And you managed to answer a few. So we'll just open the Q&A session to one last question. Does anybody have one last burning question that you'd like to ask? You can drop it into the chat box, or you can also turn on your mic and your video to ask the question.
All good. We did have a number of questions throughout, so it's okay if nobody's curious.
Right, sure. No worries, yeah. So I think that session was really wonderful. I thank you so much, Prof. You have certainly shared many ideas with us, and I really enjoyed the entire session, and I hope the rest of you enjoy the same like me. Yeah. So thank you to the audience for participating in this session. We've come to the end of the webinar. It was a pleasure having your presence and your participation today. So do look out for our next guest UOW guest lecture series. Now, before we end the session, I'd just like to invite every one of you to turn on your video just for a short while for a photo session. So kindly turn on your video.
Oh, it's lovely to see everyone.
So everyone ready? And let's go. 1, 2, 3, smile. One more time. 1, 2, 3, and smile. A good sign. Right. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. So thank you once again, Prof, for your insightful ideas. We really look forward to the next session, hopefully. Have a good day, Prof, and to all of you here, thank you for staying with us. Stay safe and take good care. We'll see you
Lovely.
again soon.
Thank you, Michelle.